I am Bryony from SMiW and I'm the project officer for workplaces here. And that my role is to support workplaces to engage with our SMiW and work resources and to tackle stigma and discrimination within their workplaces. So this session is going to be exploring complex mental illness, stigma and discrimination, and really exploring what workplaces can do to tackle that stigma and support colleagues that are experiencing complex mental illness. If you do have any questions throughout the session, we've got quite a lot on during the session, so I'd really encourage you to pop the questions into the chat and I can follow up with any answers to those. We should also have time at the end for some questions, but just pop them as they're coming into your mind so that we don't lose track of those questions. If at any point you need to leave today's session, if you get a phone call, if something comes up at home or within the office, please just feel free to leave and come back as suits yourself. We all have different things going on, so that's absolutely fine. If there's any technical issues, you cannot hear me or any of the other speakers at any point, just let us know through the chat box. That would be really helpful. I've got it up on the left-hand side here so that I can see it. We will be sending out any resources mentioned in today's session, so don't feel like you need to be scribbling down notes or copying down links. We will be sending out a PDF with the links of any resources mentioned, websites to the speakers today as well, and we will also send out the slides as a PDF form so that we've got that. And we'll also be posting the recording in the next couple of weeks onto our webinars and masterclass section of our website. But thank you all for joining us here today. I'll just be doing introductions and I'll walk us through the agenda and give some context to today's session, and then we'll have our first speaker, which will be Maya from Bipolar Scotland. So thank you for that. Scotland, Steve and Scott from Johnsons of Elgin, then we'll have a quick screen break, and then we'll hear from Natalie and Chris from Vox Scotland and Patty from SMiW, and then we will end the session with a poll, and if there's any lingering questions that have not been answered in today's session, we will answer that today. So if in case you've not come to a previous webinar, you've not engaged with SMiW before, SMiW is Scotland's national programme to end mental health, stigma and discrimination, and we're hosting today's session. Our vision is for a fairer and more inclusive Scotland that's free from mental health, stigma and discrimination, and we work closely with the Scottish Government commitment to try and tackle stigma and discrimination in relation to mental health. So that is our organisation we're part of. We've got managing partners which are SAMH and the Mental Health Foundation. So you'll often see us mentioned in ties to them. I'll be talking a lot about stigma and discrimination today. So before I do, I just wanted to explain what I mean by that. So stigma is a social process that involves labelling, stereotyping and exclusion of individuals or groups based on perceived differences that deviate from social norms. We will be speaking specifically about the stigma with long-term and complex mental illness today. Discrimination is an acted stigma, so discrimination is the inequitable or prejudicial treatment of individuals or groups based on their stigmatised identities. So that is where those attitudes, beliefs and stereotypes start to become action, and that is when it becomes discrimination. So that is what I mean when I'm talking about stigma and discrimination throughout today's session. We'll also be talking about long-term and complex mental illness. We've got a brief definition up there. I'll also be talking about the Scottish Mental Illness Stigma Study, which has been conducted with people who have experience of severe, enduring or complex mental illnesses to understand what their experiences are in the different areas of life that are affected by this stigma. So complex mental health issues are impactful, severe, enduring or episodic. They can involve high levels of psychological distress or involve a history of traumatic events or complex trauma, or include symptoms and experiences that are generally not well understood within public spheres. Some people with complex mental illness may experience one or more diagnoses or symptoms of diagnosis, such as schizophrenia and psychosis, bipolar disorder, which we'll hear a lot more about today, borderline personality disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, eating disorders, dissociative disorders, and severe depression and anxiety disorders. That is not a complete list. There's also a lot of other things that people experience that are not included within that list, but just as a couple of examples, I wanted to share that definition with you. So when we're talking about stigma, it's important to think about what we can do as an individual, but also how that can ripple out and intersect with the stigma that exists within society. So here we're talking about an intersectional and a whole systems approach. We have our own individual self and our self-stigma. So how can we really start to unpick our own beliefs and our own attitudes towards long-term mental illness? And how can that then affect the relationships, how we speak about long-term mental illness in our daily life with colleagues, with friends, with family members, and have that effect of tackling that. And that also shares out to our organisations and our workplaces, and then our communities and overall policy and society. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about ourselves as an individual, ourselves as part of organisations and the relationships that we have. And that's kind of our sphere of influence, but all of this is interconnected. When we do this work to challenge stigma, it then has an impact on our community. It has an impact on policy and societal attitudes as a whole. So all of these intersect and interlinked with each other. So it's important to be thinking about this as a whole unit about stigma, and how these different things interact with each other. Because of public stigma within society, how does that affect people that we have individual relationships with? And because of that, we've got public stigma, which comes from society and kind of media, and mass media may have a lot of social media as well. You've also got structural stigma, which is things like policies. Are your, for example, absence policy set up to include mental health in the same way it includes physical health? And you've also got self-stigma, which is your own beliefs, and that may be attitudes you have about your own mental health, or it may be about other people's mental health, and thinking about how can we unpick that. And I can see more people are joining from the lobby, so I'll admit them in as well. So what is the intention of stigma and discrimination? We talk about why is there stigma, and the reason that stigma exists is to other different groups. So there's stigma around about LGBT status, around disability status, and there's also stigma around mental health. And it is to other or dehumanize that group or state that they're deserving of low status. And it's to maintain power within society. That's ultimately the reason that people are othered. It's to conform to a social norm and maintain that power. That's why stigma across the board exists. And we've got some stigmatizing terms there and how they can impact on people. So terms like they are unintelligent or lazy undermine the intelligence and worthiness of people with mental health. And there's that expectation to constantly be productive and help yourself, which is not always possible, not just for people with long-term mental illness, but also people who have chronic illnesses, disabilities, things like polycystic ovaries. Those viewpoints are really damaging and stigmatizing to people who experience those things. Also terms like attention seeking, which is also used for a lot of young people that are experiencing mental health. It's really infantilizing, questions their ability to participate in decision making, and invalidates their experiences. So that's also language that we'd encourage you to avoid, particularly when speaking to young people as well, who often hear these terms around about mental illness. And then lastly, there's terms like dangerous, strange, chaotic, unstable, or unpredictable. A lot of this time, this comes from public stigma. Just recently, I was chatting to Patty about how there was news stories and the title was like, schizophrenic man did this. Very much labeling a disorder as dangerous or as unpredictable, which is often not the case. So it's about sensationalizing these conditions and perpetuating that stigma. So avoiding terms like that, or like hysterical, which is primarily applied to women rather than men, and kind of, again, perpetuates that gender stigma as well. So thinking about these terms, how are they being used in the public sphere, and how is that impacting your own viewpoints around about mental illness, but also chats about mental illness within your life, within your organisation? Is there a way to challenge some of that language if you are hearing it? Because that instills social fear and threat and perpetuates the belief that people with these mental illnesses are dangerous, which is often not the case at all. So that is just some examples of stigmatizing terms and kind of what that, the impact of those in terms of judgment and perceptions on people. I'll quickly chat about where stigma is most frequently occurring, and then we'll have our first speaker. So we, in the Scottish Mental Illness Stigma Study, we spoke a lot to people about where was stigma occurring, but also where was it having the biggest impact. And employment ranked 6th on the areas that it was most frequently occurring. However, it was second and most important in terms of the impact that it had on people's lives. So it was a huge area where stigma was occurring. It was having a massive impact on people's well-being, because we spend so much of our lives in employment or at work with our colleagues that when there's those stigmatizing attitudes, it's very difficult. Also, some of you have come from rural settings today as well. It's also important to think about the first one there in terms of impact is relationships. And actually in rural settings where you've got small family run businesses and things like that, those relationships where people may be experiencing stigma about their partner or parents or loved ones are also their employer or also may work with them. And that creates that line where those lines are even more blurred. And if you're experiencing stigma at home, how confident are you that that same person is going to be able to have a conversation about workplace stress or have a conversation about reasonable adjustments because of mental health? So it's thinking about how those things intersect, how those relationships and your employment intersect. A lot of people have separation between employment and relationships in their personal life, but that's not always the case as well. And we found that from this study that people had their experience of stigma, but also anticipation from stigma, which led to withdrawal in opportunities for them. I'm not going to read all these stats out, but from the Scottish Mental Illness Stigma Study, we did find that 77% of respondents stated they had been treated unfairly at work, and 74% of respondents expected to be treated unfairly at their place of work. So they were anticipating that treatment. And then 82% of respondents had stopped themselves from applying for job opportunities because of the stigma that they had faced. So if you're thinking about from an employer's perspective, you want to be attracting talent, you want to be attracting people with a diverse range of skills, that stigma is a barrier to people applying for jobs, to be applying for promotion opportunities. And that is really one of the many reasons why organisations should think about how do we tackle that stigma and ensure that people are able to apply for things and are not worried about mental health stigma, and we have an inclusive environment for everyone. And I also wanted to highlight that 75% of people had stopped themselves from discussing their mental illness needs at work. And Patty later on is going to be speaking about creating the conditions for disclosure and being a supportive line manager, thinking about what we can do to ensure that people can discuss their needs, because if you don't know about it, you can't then support that person. You can't put in reasonable adjustments. You can't be having that conversation. So the first step is thinking about, do you have an environment that has safe disclosure? Do you have an environment that's open, that's not stigmatized when it's speaking about long-term mental health and mental health in general? Are these conversations always happening, and is there space for them in your workplace? So how do we create that, which will be a topic that we discuss throughout the session today. And then last bit, we've also talked about the impact on people's own self-worth. So a lot of people said that they felt ashamed because of stigma, that they assumed people would think the worst of them, and that they were dangerous or they were to blame for their condition, which has a huge impact on people's self-confidence, their ability to engage with others within the workplace as well, and that withdrawal. And I wanted to read out one quote, which was, "I put extra pressure on myself and work much longer hours than anyone else to prove that I am worthy or able to be employed. I fully expect to go in most days to be fired or pulled up for issues with what I'm doing in my job." And that has a huge impact on how people excel at work. If you're constantly worried about that, you cannot perform to the best of your ability. You cannot be 100% all of the time. And that is really difficult for people going in with that anticipation and that anxiety. I do have some other quick quotes specifically about long-term mental health conditions. I'll just read out a couple and then I'll pass over to Maya. So this person said, "Due to my bipolar disorder diagnosis, I failed a workplace medical for a teaching role, despite never having an issue related to my mental health throughout my teaching career." They subsequently quoted the Glasgow bin lorry tragedy as their rationale, implying that my condition made me dangerous. I was certain that they felt I was unfit for work, so I withdrew. I was without pay for 4 months as a result of this experience. And there's a lot of conversation right now about employability, about ensuring people can get into work and about it being accessible for people. Having strict conditions about if anyone's ever experienced a mental health condition without assessing their ability to do that job is direct discrimination in the first place, but it also limits that person to seek out opportunities. So think about your own systems that are in place. Is there things like that in place in your organisation? And can that be challenged a bit? can we have more in-depth conversations with people about, well, what does that diagnosis mean for them and how might that impact them at work, and then assess through that conversation rather than just seeing a diagnosis and making a judgment on a person. Another person has said, I have had people talk about my condition that I have in front of me without them realising I have that condition, and what they say is not meant to be cruel, but it's not sympathetic either, and it doesn't make me feel that there's a place to talk about it at my workplace. When we're talking about long-term mental health, just assume that there is someone in your workplace that has any condition, because that way that, and you're speaking about it, it won't be spoke about in a stigmatizing way. You can't assume that there is no one there that experiences OCD or bipolar, because the likely is that especially if you're in a larger organization, there will be someone. So think about the way that these things are spoke about in your workplace as well, and how to have conversations about support in a way that isn't stigmatizing. And I'll leave on this last quote, which is, there's very little understanding of some conditions. Often employers have no idea that these conditions are chronic and can vary in severity over time. I have lost 2 jobs, one of which I loved, due to a flare-up of my mental illness and a lack of understanding from my employer. So this is how this stigma is impacting on people, and it's why it's so important that this stigma is challenged. We're going to, there's the last quote there about bipolar, but we're about to hear from Bipolar Scotland from Maya, so I'll pass over to her to speak more about bipolar and the stigma associated in the workplace and how employers can support. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much. Let me just try and share my screen. Hopefully it'll work okay. Okay, hopefully you can see that okay. Bryony, if there's any problems, just let me know.
I will do, thank you.
So good morning, everyone. My name's Maya, and I'm an Impact and Development Manager with Bipolar Scotland. I'm here today with my colleague Richard, who's one of our peer support workers, and Richard will be talking a little bit later on about his experience supporting people with bipolar in the workplace. So I want to start today by just telling you a little bit about Bipolar Scotland and who we are. So we are Scotland's only national charity, and we support people living with bipolar across Scotland, and we also support people who have a loved one with bipolar as well. We've been around for, I think, about 33 years now. We're quite a small team, so at the moment we have 12 members of staff, and we have an amazing cohort of more than 40 really passionate volunteers, without whom we definitely could not do what we do. But we always talk about ourselves as being a small team, but with big ambitions. Lived experience is very much at the heart of who we are as an organisation. So we have lived experience represented throughout our volunteers, throughout our staff team, even on our board of trustees. More than half of our trustees live with bipolar as well. As a line manager within the organisation, I'm really proud to say that out of 7 of our team that I line manage, 5 of them have bipolar, and it's a real privilege to work with them as their line manager. As an organisation, we deliver non-clinical support, so our focus is really on helping people be able to learn the skills they need to be able to manage their bipolar. So in doing that, we have a great focus on peer support, so we deliver support groups across Scotland. We also deliver one-to-one peer support specifically for people who have had a recent diagnosis of bipolar. And we also deliver something called self-management training. As well as delivering self-management training for people with bipolar, we also have an equivalent course for friends and family of a person with bipolar. So we're really proud of all the work that we do across Scotland. I appreciate that there will be some people on the call today who maybe have bipolar or who have a friend or family member with the condition, but equally there will be people here today who have heard of bipolar but might not know too much about it. So I am going to spend just a little bit of time talking to you about what bipolar is. First, I've got some statistics. So bipolar affects about 2 to 3% of the population. So in Scotland, that's actually about 1 in 50 people. On average, it actually takes 10 years to get a diagnosis of bipolar, and that's from the first time that somebody presents to a medical professional with symptoms. So if you can imagine, they could have been living for quite a long time, any number of years with symptoms before even getting to that point. So misdiagnosis is common, and it taking a long time to get a diagnosis is common, and that's something that we really want to change in Scotland. Having bipolar increases a person's suicide risk by up to 20 times. So bipolar is a severe and enduring, it's a complex mental illness. People's life expectancy with bipolar is 8 to 12 years less than the general population. So people with bipolar also experience a lot of health inequalities. Bipolar does not discriminate, so it can affect anyone of any age and any background. But what we really want to emphasize is that bipolar, although it's a lifelong condition, it can be managed with the right treatment and support. And many people with bipolar are incredibly successful, have fantastic family lives and working lives. And bipolar is not necessarily a barrier to that. So what is bipolar? Bipolar is a mood disorder, and it's categorized by extreme highs of mood that we call mania, and also extreme lows that we call depression. So you can see the little chart I've got on screen there, and you can maybe see the squiggly line. By the way, this is not a very scientific chart, but it's just to give you a bit of an indication of what we mean when we're talking about bipolar. So that orange squiggly line, for most of us, when we're talking about just, people who maybe don't live with bipolar, for most of us, we have ups and downs. That's just part of being a human. We have mood swings. There are times we feel good. There are times when we feel low for whatever reason. That is not what bipolar is. With bipolar, we are talking about the extremes of that. With bipolar, it's episodic, so that means that people will experience these episodes of mood disruption, and these can last for anything from weeks to months to even years. There are different types of bipolar, so you can see on screen we've got bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and cyclothymia. Bipolar 1 is the only type of bipolar where people will experience full-blown mania. Oftentimes when people are manic, that will often end in a hospitalization to allow them to get the help they need to get better. For people with bipolar 2, we talk about something called hypomania, which is it's a lesser mania. However, it can still be extremely disruptive to someone's life. And what I would say is it's not just all ups and downs. For a lot of people with bipolar, they can have prolonged periods where their mood is very stable. So yeah, so this isn't representative of everyone with bipolar, but it can help to hopefully convey that when we talk about bipolar, what we're talking about is mood disruption. And oh, hang on. The difference between bipolar and normal fluctuations in mood is the intensity of those moods, the duration, so how long they last, and also the impact on someone's life. So with mania and hypomania, what I will say is that it can be, not everybody with bipolar has the exact same experience. You can see some of the symptoms of high mood on screen. So some people might find that they feel quite euphoric and quite joyful. They can also feel extremely restless. They might talk a lot more than normal. They might be quite distracted. So if you can imagine having maybe a hypomanic episode in the workplace, it might be quite difficult to stay on task. Less critical thinking, new ideas are accepted more easily. Less consideration to potential consequences. So people might make decisions and they might do things that feel extremely out of character for the people around them. They're sort of left thinking, what is going on? Because it seems so out of character. Oftentimes people will describe a great sense of productivity and creativity in hypomania. So actually in the workplace, it might be difficult to tell someone is struggling, because what it might look like on the outside is that somebody is actually excelling in their work. We can also see that people might have a loss of social inhibition. So again, acting or saying things that they normally wouldn't. If you can imagine, after somebody has experienced a manic or hypomanic episode, there can be strong feelings of guilt, of shame, for things they've said or done during that period that can be really difficult. For people who are manic, they might also experience they might also experience symptoms of psychosis. So things like hallucinations or delusions as well, which can obviously be really frightening for them and the people around them. and a decreased need for sleep. I've got a quote here from one of my colleagues who described what mania feels like for her. So she says, "When I'm manic, I feel completely immortal. Anything seems possible. I completely believe that I can radically change the world with my words or actions. Real life becomes irrelevant, and I live in a world of ideas. So eating, drinking, and responsibilities lose all meaning. I talk loudly and incoherently. The last time I was hypomanic, I completed a 3-year master's degree in 1 year whilst working full time. This is the bipolar superpower. You can manage multiple tasks at once and process information quickly." On the other end of the spectrum, we've got depression. So most of us here probably know what the symptoms of depression are, and I would say that it's very similar for bipolar depression as it is for unipolar depression. So if you can imagine in the workplace, you might have somebody who is withdrawn from colleagues, withdrawn from social events, somebody who appears to be quite irritable. Somebody might be experiencing just a loss of confidence and low self-esteem impacting on their work productivity. A lack of energy, people might start sleeping or eating more than they used to. They might have difficulty concentrating, and they might also experience thoughts of suicide. In terms of what helps, as I said, everyone is different. So people living with bipolar, there's no sort of magic pill that people can take. So people usually tell us that they will rely on a combination of these support structures. So for some people, it's medication. That can often be a really important part of what keeps someone well. But we also know with medication that people take with bipolar, those can often come with really difficult side effects. So somebody in the workplace, for example, who's maybe going through a medication change, they might need a little bit more support at that time, or even some time off to allow their body to get used to that change in medication. For a lot of people, it's about good support networks, whether that's friends and family, whether that's peer support from an organization like ourselves, or access and support from a counselor, a psychiatrist, from a doctor. People will also utilize self-management tools, mood monitoring, understanding their triggers and warning signs. It's not always possible to prevent an episode of bipolar. However, what we try to teach people to do is to recognize when there might be a change coming, because then you can put things in place to try and ensure that that episode isn't maybe as problematic as it could have been otherwise. It's about staying active, eating well, and prioritizing sleep. But for a lot of people with bipolar, being well also means having stable, meaningful, and supportive employment. And that's often a really important part of someone's recovery. So in terms of working with bipolar, research says that around about 40 to 60% of people with bipolar are actually employed. So that's a lot of people with bipolar who are working. And in our experience as an organization, we've worked with a lot of people who have, very senior, high-powered, high-stress jobs who are managing that alongside their bipolar. Last year, we did a survey of all of our members, and we found that 76% of people had left a job in the past due to their bipolar. 63% have actually felt discriminated against at work due to their bipolar. And 65% felt they'd been overlooked for a promotion because of their bipolar. I've got a couple of quotes on screen here. So someone says, "I was previously sacked when my employer found out about my diagnosis. I've been in workplaces where I felt unsupported and in turn felt unable to take on additional duties or to look for progression. Stigma and lack of understanding of the condition has played a role in my previous workplaces. I was taken off some duties and effectively demoted for being unreliable after 3 short absences in a year." I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Richard, who's going to talk a little bit about his experience as a peer worker supporting people in the workplace. Richard, over to you.
Hi everybody, I'm Richard. I'm a peer support worker with Bipolar Scotland, and I want to talk about 3 of my peers that I've been working with in the past in relation to their employment. So the first person firstly I'd like to say that I work 3 days a week for Bipolar Scotland as a peer support worker, but I'm actually working 3 longer days. So I was actually I'm employed for 4 days, which I do is three longer days, because I'm a visual artist, and it means I can spend more time in my studio when I'm not doing this job. So the first person I'd like to talk about, Susan, um, was also working 4 days a week in her employment, and she was quite a senior role, organising a lot of meetings with lots of stakeholders online and in person. And I suggested to her that she was struggling with her job a little bit, and I suggested that she speak to her boss in regards to seeing whether or not she could also do 3 days a week, longer days, rather than four shorter days. So she spoke to her boss, and he was absolutely fine about it. So she got one extra day off a week, having a recent diagnosis as well, I might add. And to to cut a long story short, it was life changing for her having that one extra day off a week. So her working days were turned into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, working longer days, and she had between Friday and Monday off, in which she had time to recover from working in quite a high intensity position. And that's a real positive
Mm.
situation that came about. The second peer that I'd like to mention is, her name is Karen, and she works for the NHS as a specialist. She had a recent diagnosis with bipolar disorder after quite a serious manic episode where she ended up being psychotic, and she
Turn it down a wee bit, please.
sorry.
Just muted that participant, that's a bother. You can continue.
Right,
Sorry about
sorry. So she's working as a specialist with the NHS, had a recent diagnosis of bipolar. She went through a psychotic episode and ended up in hospital. And it was very traumatic to her. So she had to take long-term sick leave from her job. And as she was recovering, the NHS Occupational Health Department agreed that she could speak to me weekly during her working hours rather than out with of her working hours, and they were very accommodating regarding this. And it really it meant that when she's on the job, she could, rather than me speaking to her during her lunch hour or after work, it meant she could speak to me during the day about how she's getting on during the job, and the peer support really was helping her very much. So that's another positive situation for her in the workplace. The third peer that I'd like to speak about is called Louise, and she works for a very large financial institution in Scotland. And she also had a recent diagnosis, which ended up having to be on, she had to be on long term sick leave. And she had many issues regarding her recent diagnosis. And she was also, unfortunately, being stalked by her ex partner.
that.
So she didn't feel safe outside of her home. So her employers reintroduced her to her job through an extended phased return, where she could work flexibly and also hybrid working. And they were fine with her working from home when she felt unwell. And
Mm.
she also had to go into the office. When she had to go into the office, they gave her a designated parking space so that she could travel door to door, because she was very worried about bumping into her ex-partner who had been violent towards her. And they also gave her, rather than hot desking, they gave her a specific desk in the office where she could work from. And while she was doing this job, she actually was working full time, and they were putting her through university to do a degree in her specific subject. Unfortunately, due to her bipolar, she never managed to get her honours. So she only got an ordinary degree, but thankfully, her employers increased her wages in line with the honours degree level pay, which was a significant pay increase and really helped her. So they were really, really supporting her in work. And that's really three examples of how people with bipolar disorder can be supported positively at work. And that's all I really wanted to say today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Those are some really good examples that, like you say, just illustrate that actually it's very possible to support someone in the workplace with bipolar. When we've asked our members, what can employers do to help support you, what comes back time and time again is that people want to be understood. But I think what we also want to get across is it's not just understanding or awareness, which is great, but it's also about compassion. You can see that the first quote on screen here says it's about understanding that the person is ill and not just lazy, stupid, or annoying. Um, the symptoms of bipolar can be extremely difficult to live with. It is an illness, and people are not always in control of when they get ill or how often they get ill. So I think it's not just about understanding, but it is about having compassion for employees with a mental illness in the same way you would if you had an employee who was struggling with some aspect of their physical health. We see that people want flexibility, and I think Richard has given a really good example of how that can work in practice. We appreciate it's not always possible for every work setting. We also know that with bipolar, stress is a major trigger. So being able to get support with people's workload, that's something that people tell us can be important. One of the examples Richard gave there was about a workplace actually allowing their employee to have supportive appointments with their peer worker during work time. So whilst people are often allowed appointments for hospital appointments, it's about looking at, can we be more flexible if someone has bipolar and they need to see their psychiatrist or they're working with a counsellor? Those things often happen during the working day. Is there a way we can support them with that? Because ultimately, if they're being given support to look after their mental health and to stay well, that's going to benefit you as an employer as well. I love this thing here that someone has said. So if hospitalized, the workplace could send a bunch of flowers or a card. It seems like such a small or insignificant thing. But if you think about times when there's been a colleague or someone in your workplace who's maybe, maybe they've broken their leg, the likelihood is that they would get a card sent to them saying "Get well soon," but we don't seem to extend that same sort of sentiment to people who are maybe hospitalized for mental health. People can feel awkward. They can feel, oh, I don't know what to say. But actually, it is okay to say, hey, I hope you get well soon. Really looking forward to welcoming you back to work. And that can make such a difference for someone. What else can you do as an employer? One thing we would say is don't make assumptions. If you have somebody coming to you and they're brave enough to disclose that they have bipolar, don't assume that means that they can't do their job. It's about talking to that person and being able to understand how it affects them in the workplace, and what they're asking for from you. It's about considering reasonable adjustments, and a reminder that bipolar is considered a disability, so it is a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. That means as an employer, you do have a duty to help ensure that your employee with bipolar is not discriminated against. One of the things we like using with all of our staff is something called a Wellbeing Action Plan. So that allows employees to be able to think about, okay, well, what does it actually look like? If I started to become unwell at work, what would those warning signs be? Or what are things at work that can possibly trigger a bipolar episode? What do I need from my employer? And what I would say is don't just single out people with bipolar or people who are living with a mental health condition. Look at doing wellbeing action plans for everyone in your organization, because it can really aid you as a line manager to be able to support your team and, importantly, to get the best out of people, which benefits everyone. Always maintain confidentiality. We do speak to people who disclose their illness to their employer and suddenly everyone knows about it. They're being treated differently by people. It's really important. Remember that nobody has a legal obligation to disclose their bipolar diagnosis to you. But if they do that, they are trusting that you're going to hold that in confidence. Plan for a positive return. The likelihood is someone with bipolar, even if they manage their bipolar really well, there might come a time when they need to take a little bit of time off work because of an episode. So it's about planning for a positive return, keeping in touch with them, letting them know they're missed, looking at things like a phased return, and making sure that everyone in the team is there to help support them on their return. And as I said, for us, it's about making well-being a priority across the organisation. So creating an environment where people feel safe to open up when they need help and support, where they can trust that you as an employer are going to treat that information with respect, and you're going to take it seriously and not further stigmatise them as well. We are just getting ready as an organisation to launch some new workplace training for corporate members of Bipolar Scotland, where we're going to have an in-depth focus on mental health conditions like bipolar. This training has been co-produced with people with lived experience. It tackles stigma and myths head on. It's about moving from awareness to action, and it's going to help you to get practical tools and strategies to implement in your workplace. Like I say, we're getting ready to launch this, so I'm very happy to be contacted by anyone who would maybe like to know a bit more about this. The other thing I'd say is that we are a member organisation, so if anyone would like to sign up to become a member for free to support us and to keep in touch with us and to learn more about our bipolar community, please do scan the QR code on screen where you'll be taken to our website to fill out a short membership form. One of the things that you get as a member is you get a copy of our e-magazine called On the Level, which comes out every 2 months. I've got a screenshot on screen there. So as an example, our last issue had a focus on managing business in a bipolar. So we had interviews with several people who have bipolar, but who also successfully manage their own businesses as well. I think that's everything from us just now. I've put mine and Richard's contact details on screen. We're always really happy to get any questions. And just to say thank you so much for listening to us this morning.
Thank you so much for that, both Maya and Richard. That was really useful. I'm sure there was loads of really good information around about reasonable adjustments and practical steps that employers can put in place, which is amazing. So thank you so much for that. I'll make sure to include the QR code and links to the website in the follow-up document as well. So thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat. So I'm going to give, there's one hand up, so I'll ask Leslie and then we'll have our next presentation after that. Leslie, what's your question?
Hi, thanks very much for that. Just following up, Richard made a comment, might have seemed a small thing, but I picked up on it about his colleague who was hot desking and was given a dedicated desk at work. And it occurs to me, we do a lot of that here, and a lot of organisations are going that way. And with hybrid working and working from home, most people now are used to kind of these flexible work areas. Does that make it more difficult or less difficult for employers to support employees with bipolar?
Richard, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add about that example.
I think it depends. I mean, the way we work in Bipolar Scotland is that every single peer with bipolar disorder is treated individually, and every single diagnosis is different. Everybody's on different medication regimes, and they have different types of bipolar. So every single person's different. So there's no two cases that are absolutely alike. So what I would say is it definitely benefits somebody having their own place in the workplace. So when they turn up, they know exactly where they are and their surroundings around them, and that's very beneficial. But as I say, every single person is different, so there's no two cases that are the same in relation to this. Although there's similarities, the differences are there as well. But from my own experience with working with people, hot desking can be slightly disorientating for certain people, depending on background noise and where, depending on where they are with their bipolar disorder. A lot of background noise can be quite off-putting for them in the workplace. So and with a lot of modern offices, there's no places where people can go just to decompress slightly. So there's always the benefit of having somewhere that if someone can speak to their employer and say, when I'm feeling a little bit unwell, is there some place that I can go to a room, for instance, that where they can go decompress, reduce their stress levels, rather than having to take time off work. They can just chill out for half an hour and then go back to their work. So, there's a lot of benefits to these sort of things.
I would
Okay,
say as
thank you.
well, just following up on what Richard said, particularly if somebody is maybe struggling particularly with hypomania or that high mood, often, like Richard says, things like bright lights, loud noises, lots going on, that can be quite triggering. That can increase somebody's mood as well. So I think, like Richard says, we've often had people who come to us and say that, yeah, with hot desk, it's maybe not possible for them to have their own specific desk, but their employer has allowed them to have, okay, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling overstimulated, there is a quiet space, or here is an office that you can go to if you need to. So even something like that can make a difference.
Thank you so much for that. That was really, really useful. So thank you. If anyone's got any other questions, hop them into the chat and I can follow up with them. So thank you for that. We're going to pass on to Steve and Scott from Johnsons of Elgin to speak about what they do in the workplace to open up conversations about mental health to support their employers' well-being, and also what Scott's been doing within the community to encourage men to speak about mental health. So I'll pass over to them. If you want to share slides, if you're there. We may have lost connection slightly. Steve, I'm just checking if you're there. Okay. I'll give it one more minute to hear from them. If not, we can always switch presentation orders around, and we'll hear from Natalie Vox. So I'm just going to check, Steve and Scott, are you available to share your slides and speak about the work that Johnsons of Elgin are doing? No bother. What we'll do is, Natalie, are you available to present just now, and we can switch the order of things?
Sure.
Amazing, thank you. So we'll hear from Natalie and Chris from Vox, who are going to speak about the role of lived experience, and then we'll come back to Steve and Scott.
Hang on, I need to just redo that. I didn't click the magic button. Can you see those?
Yep.
Now?
You can see the slides.
Perfect. And Chris, just checking, I did see you on the call, but just checking that you can unmute and speak as well.
Yeah, I can unmute. I just can't show the camera.
No worries. Right. Well, I'll run through a quick introduction to Vox for anybody who hasn't heard of us, Vox Scotland Voices of Experience, and then we'll share some of our experiences around workplace stigma for people with enduring mental illness. So the easiest way for me to introduce Vox is our snazzy little 90-second animation. We really love using this. It explains who we are, what we do, and the voices are some of our members explaining about Vox Scotland.
Voices of Experience, known as Vox Scotland, is Scotland's national collective advocacy organisation for mental health.
Established in 2006, we are run for and by our members who all have lived experience or living experience of mental ill health.
You can join Vox Scotland for free as an individual, group or associate member. Our members can be as involved as they want to be, choosing to contribute views, experiences and insights if, when and how they want, and with the right support they need to do so.
They can also take part in training, members' meetings, AGMs and events, and everyone receives our weekly newsletter.
Our strength comes from our members, and we represent their views, interests and priorities to Scottish Government, the NHS and others to influence mental health policy and practice to try to make it work better for everyone. Our members are the driving force behind our work and are at the heart of who we are and what we do. Join Vox Scotland now and be part of the change we want to see in Scotland on mental health.
Vox Scotland gives me a sense of community, understanding and change in the unforgiving world of mental health.
Vox Scotland has simply given me the opportunity to be in a community where each voice is heard and valued. Voices of Experience.
So that makes my job really easy when I can play that. I think it summarises who we are really well. And for anyone who is new to our organisation, well, we've had a really fantastic year. We're always super busy. We're again a very small national Scottish organisation, a very small team, but we spent a lot of our time this year lobbying for change with the Scottish Government, advocating for better services. We carry out our own research. So last year we launched a report that was a lived experience report looking at people's experiences of care from psychiatrists in Scotland. And we also do some training. So we've delivered some training to healthcare professionals. So yeah, really busy time for us and really delighted to work with SMiW and come along today to share some lived experience views around stigma and the workplace. So yeah, how can workplaces address mental health stigma and discrimination for people with long-term mental health conditions? And we're really talking about severe and enduring mental illness. So we'll share with you some of our experiences as an employer, managing staff, but also managing volunteers, and as employees living with enduring mental illnesses in the workplace. So I think Bryony already said it today. When I was thinking about what to share with you, one of the first things that came to mind was always assume that lived experience is in the room. And that can be when people are having conversation at work about mental illnesses, but also a lot of the work that we do, we're asked to bring somebody with lived experience or represent the lived experience voice when people are kind of considering a change and they want to make sure that they've consulted lived experience. But quite often that is ignoring the fact that actually there will be lived experience already in the room, so you don't always have to go and find someone. The reason I put that on and reflect that particular thing is I remember a conversation that I was having while I was listening to a talk from the chief executive of Glasgow City Council, and we were talking about people who have caring responsibilities, and she very passionately said, please don't assume that I don't have lived experience because I'm in a leadership role. She also had her own lived experience of caring and was very open about that, and so she wanted to bring that. Don't assume that someone doesn't have lived experience. We don't know what everybody has been facing, especially when people don't necessarily feel open to disclose. But if someone has disclosed their lived experience, the way that I work in Vox and have worked in other organisations is to really try and work out and ask the person how to recognise if they're becoming unwell. And they'll know some of the things that they do, and also ask what would be good to support them if that happens. So have a plan in place for if somebody becomes unwell, what are the things that they can say to you, this will help me, and they can communicate that when they are well so that they are unwell. And when we're working at the moment, we have hybrid working. It can be quite easy to kind of disappear. So one of the things that I may have discussed with my team or with other people is if I become unwell, you might not see me so much. Like I might not come into the office so much, I might work from home, I might not turn my camera on so much. And there's always little things that we can do that someone can say, if you see me withdrawing and you don't hear from me for a couple of weeks, that that might mean I'm busy, but it might also mean that I've become unwell. And this is what I'd like you to do to support me in that case. Maybe reach out and arrange a one-to-one catch-up and check in that things are okay. We also advocate for flexible working. We've already heard how good that can be. And at Vox, we also have wellbeing days where staff are able to take a wellbeing day at short notice if something comes up and they feel unwell. Again, I think we're all going to be on the same page with this. If someone is living with mental illness, they may need regular appointments, and that is part of keeping well. That is really good for someone to be doing. So they are always within the working day, but they can be worked in very easily if you give people time to make their regular appointments. The next 3 words I kind of put up there as a wee bit of a discussion, I guess. The three P's for me, it's just something that I noticed a lot in myself or noticed with other people. Presenteeism, perfectionism, and procrastination. I think these are 3 things that, as someone who lives with mental illness, you can really struggle with. Presenteeism, it's very hard to show up and be fully present if you are becoming unwell. Perfectionism, it's okay to not be okay, but it also has to be okay to not always be perfect. And I think we've already heard about that strive to make things perfect all the time. And procrastination, we all do it, but sometimes you can end up ruminating on, oh, I'm procrastinating, I'm not getting on. So helping members of staff or volunteers through presenteeism, perfectionism, and procrastination, I think can really help. And that comes down to making some reasonable adjustments and really understanding the person and what they're living with. So hopefully that's okay. It's a wee bit of a super quick summary from me, but I'm going to pass over to Chris to talk through some of his experience of mental illness in the workplace.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for letting me be here. Can everybody hear me? Because I'm having a tech issue.
Yep, we can hear you.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, banter, just to take the first point, depending on how heavy the industry you're working in, so one with a great deal of manual labour tend to be rougher than ones where you'd be working in an office, for instance. And my job in various places has been management and also technical. So as management, you're a fair target if you treat people like human beings, which means really walking around and seeing how they are and taking a bit of trouble to find out what's wrong, and then fall ill yourself, you immediately get caught up in the banter. Everybody has to have a nickname. You have to have a word that describes your manager. Mine was loony, because I was diagnosed with untreatable depression, which then re-diagnosed as bipolar and 1 or 2 other things. People would say, particularly family and people who I knew, my friends, would say, go for a walk, because you can clear your head, you'll be in nature, which is good for you, and you get the time off for it. That was fine until I was made redundant, which was a bit dodgy, really, because redundancy says that you are your job is disappearing, your job is no longer needed. Whereas my job was needed, they didn't require somebody who was a loony to do that job. It caused too much trouble on the work floor, and other people couldn't deal with it. I didn't like, but I could live with the surname, with the nickname of Looney. Believe me, there are people with far worse nicknames. Another couple, there was a chap who had learning difficulties, and he was known as Rocket, from Rocket Scientist. and he quite liked the fact that people were talking about him and he had friends, so he put up with Rocket. There was another one called Google, also a chap with learning difficulties. He was called Google because he didn't know anything at all. He did. He was, if you took the time to get to know him, he was good and capable of doing a job, in fact, a better job than some people. But that was the banter, all coming in the banter. Not being able to get a job because of age, and I didn't disclose my mental illness, but I hit 50 and suddenly became unemployable, except possibly for B&Q. Luckily, at that stage, I came up to Murray and met Heidi Tweedy, who some of you might know from the Murray Wellbeing Hub, and she enrolled me in a course called WRAP, Wellness Recovery Action Plans. And that was brilliant because all of a sudden here was a course that was tailored to me because you wrote your own manuals. Armed with this new knowledge and body armor, I would then take on the role of a volunteer and talking to people about stigma, which, given it had 20 years of it, was quite passionate about this, including wonderful things like SMiW's Pass the Badge campaign. We loved that up in Martin. It was also when I first heard about Vox, and Vox are my kind of guys. So it's a shame they're in Glasgow, but there's a little lamppost. I'm holding up the torch, Vox up in the northeast. That really covers it. I hope in this brief thing I've made it sensible for you. And it's my experience, but it's also other people's experience. Natalie, with her summing up sentence talking about reasonable adjustment, is a thing that management boards know very little about and will conveniently ignore by saying the person's not suitable for physical reasons. And it's something that we still have to work against. So there you go. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you to SMiW for having this and for having us here and allowing us to come and share some of our experiences. I hope it's been helpful. So that's all from us.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was amazing. And I love that there's so much Northeast representation here today between Johnsons of Elgin and Chris, and I'm also in Elgin at the moment. It's great. So that's amazing. Thank you so much. That lived experience was so valuable, and everything that you shared. If people are looking to share lived experience stories, have loads of amazing ones on their website. I'll link the website, so please do have a look at that if you're looking to have conversations about lived experience in your workplace as well. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass over to Johnsons of Elgin and the reconnection, so that's great. And then we'll hear from Patty. If people do need to take a break, because I'm aware that just for time we didn't have our scheduled break. If you do need to take a break, go get a drink of water, just rest your eyes from the screen. That's absolutely fine. Please do that at any point that you feel that you need to. But thank you. We're now going to hear from Scott and Steve from Johnsons of Elgin about their work within the workplace and also Scott's work within the community as well. So thank you.
Hello everybody, thank you for welcoming us. We do apologise for our technical issues and we had to restart the computer, but there we go. We both work at Johnsons of Elgin. It's a family run business and it's been established for 227 years, so it's one of the biggest employers within the community. I've been working here now for just 6 months. One of my passions is mental health and wellbeing, but I go on to that a little bit later on. But I think it was probably on my first or second day I was mentioning mental health and wellbeing. I think I actually mentioned it in my employment interview. And the name of Scott Russell came up and this lovely gentleman sat next to me. Scott and I work very, very closely together. Scott is the chair of Murray Mentalk, and he's going to talk a little bit about what he does in the community and what we do together, plus other people within the workplace. Now, I come from a consultancy background. I've been in health and safety for 20 years now, and somebody said to me one day that we've been screaming safety for years and just whispering health, and that is absolutely true. I think after the pandemic things have changed. I think that now the younger generation are more open to talk about it, but we work in an organisation of 700 and odd people of all ages, from young people to slightly more mature people. So when I came in, I wanted to just assess where the culture was. What do we do with mental health and well-being? Where are we at on our journey? I've always used something that's called a Bradley curve, and that measures an organisational culture of where we're at. I'm not going to reveal just at the moment where we're at, because we're still on the journey. But what I will reveal to you is basically an assessment that anybody can use, and in my experience, shows how we move from having nothing in place, what the potential blockers are for moving forward, and what happens at key stages when the blockers are removed, and then we are key to thrive and our journey within our culture progresses. So this is our first slide, and that sometimes you go into organizations where there's a lack of an awareness. So, people don't understand what mental health illness is or mental health conditions. As we all said, it's stigmatized and it's not within the priority of an organization to look at this. This is basically just down to a lack of awareness. People don't want to talk about it because it's something, in the past has been stigmatized, and we're not willing to talk about it. And that's where we move into sort of phase 2, where we become dependent. So we're dependent on people that have got a passion, people with lived experience, people that go the extra mile to say, do you know what? We need to do something about this. And we need to get out there, do something, and start raising awareness. Now, if people are ignorant of mental health and well-being issues, it's usually because they are unaware. So raising awareness and giving them the tools they need to understand is the first stage. So what we've done is we've looked at mental health first aiders. Okay, we've got them here, they're established, but they haven't used their skills. Why? Because people don't know that they're on one of our sites, that they're not available. So we've got to make them more visible. And then we looked at, the time that they did their training, and that could have been years ago. And have they progressed anything? Have you had a conversation? No. What are the blockers there? Well, we'd be insecure at doing this. So we've got to raise the awareness of full body listening, how to conduct a conversation with people. So it was going through a little bit of time with the mental health first aiders, understanding that we need to get them out there. So we've done that. We've built a SharePoint page which has useful links, and this is open up to all employees. So that's usual links to support. But I thought, how are we going to start moving this forward even more? And I thought, if you're an employee and you're suffering in silence, why would that be? What would the blockers be? And the blockers would be, if you think about it, awareness again. Who would I go to? Oh, I can go to a mental health first aider. Great, that's an option now. What about my manager? Okay, so is that an issue? Do they know? Do we ever discuss it? So where we're at basically now is developing the way that we speak to our managers and empowering our managers to have a conversation, understanding, how they recognize that one of their employees might not be themselves, how they approach it. And we use just something that everybody would probably know on this meeting is see, say, signpost. So again, it's tailored for mental health first aiders, but it's good practice. So, you know, why shouldn't managers do it? So we've run workshops with managers now. So this is now sort of gaining traction. Now, the next stage is, this is where most things in cultures tend to stagnate. And the key driver here is the board of directors, the CEO. This is absolute top level engagement that you need. If they're not engaged, it becomes and stays at the dependent stage. There's various ways that you can approach this. You know, basically under the law, the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 and the Equalities Act that we've spoken about as well, it puts a duty on employers to look after the health, safety and well-being of their employees. So again, we can say it's law, but we can also say what tools do you need to be able to fulfill your legal obligation. So again, conversations happen. After the conversations happen, what tends to see in an organisation there that it becomes embedded in their values, their core values. And that's the most important thing. This is what we stand for. We're looking out for the health, safety and well-being of our employees. We're running initiatives. We're doing this. We're having great communication. We're having workshops. We're open and it comes. So this is where we move from what's known as a psychologically unsafe, when people come into an organisation and are scared to say anything because basically my manager may say no. We want people to challenge us, our managers and our exec team. So that way it becomes a psychologically safe and healthy environment for them. The be or end all of a business like Johnson's of Elgin, and like most businesses, is product, how we do it and what have you. So we need good people, skilled people. And I just point to them and say, well, a happy worker is a productive worker. A psychologically safe worker is a productive worker. So somebody that can come in with no fear of saying, yes, this has been discussed. I need to talk about something. I've got somewhere to go. It's a journey. It's a long journey. We're going along that Bradley curve. Are we where we need to be? No. Are we moving forward? Yes. Is it as quick as I want and the organisation wants? Probably not, but we're driving it. So that's basically that. And this is the most important piece of documentation that was given to me by a BSI auditor. BSI are the British Institute's standard agency, so they re-certifying us for ISO's 9-14001. And I won't read it out to you verbatim, but it's actually, this comes from the Health and Safety Executive, which is the government body for health and safety. And if you look on there, it basically says in no uncertain terms, and there's a link down the bottom that you can read the document itself, that if board members fail to take into account their legal obligations and their moral obligations, they are failing their business and their people. It's very strongly worded, and it should be. So again, have a look at that. If you need some evidence, documentation that might be able to, you know, change opinions, unstigmatize things, that's really, really good to use. So we have built a strategy. Where are we going? How are we getting there? And this is what's happening in Q1, and I'm putting Q2 together. So things are changing. We're doing stuff. Scotty, when we were offline, is writing down, could we have a mental health and wellbeing day, you know, workshops? We're looking at safe spaces for people as well, you know, as a breakout place where Maury Wellbeing Hub can come in and talk to us. And that brings me on to them in a second, because they're key. This is what we're running internally, which is based on lived experience. There's more suicide awareness and suicide prevention. I lost my son to suicide in 2019. I'm a group volunteer for SOBS, Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide. And so through lived experience, I also suffer from PTSD. These are all lived experiences for people. So the one that we're doing now is Let's Talk, having a conversation about mental health and well-being. So we're saying, how do you talk to people? It's all about human connections. So we said we introduced the stress bucket. What is the stress bucket? So people can understand, managers can understand what happens if we don't empty our stress buckets, and what do we do outside of work to manage our stress. So when we come in, we understand that. And when we start talking about it, that builds connections. So I'm asking the managers now, I want you to make up a slide and introduce what you do to empty your stress bucket. And it's something like this. And I said, I want you to do this with your teams. So when you're talking about a safety moment, do a well-being moment. I said, what you will find then is straight away there is a connection. My manager is talking about mental health and well-being, and he or she's been proactive in the way that they're talking about it. I give them a little slide here of what I do. So yes, I'm mad on border collies, yeah, and that's my son, and we do a bit of crafting. I also write and everything. But all that says this to the people, you know, what do you do? And when we talk to them, you find that people in the room have got connections, and they actually go out of the room talking, having made those connections. And I said, right now, go away and do it with your teams. And they have started to do that. So we're starting to build connections. This is a process that's not a one-off. It's a continuing, like anything in health and safety, it's a never-ending journey, and we're on the journey together. So I also asked them, what mantras have you got? How do you, as a manager or as a person, look at yourself and think about what you want to do? How do you want to make a difference to yourself and to the world and to the people that you work with? I said, these are my mantras based on my lived experience of being bereaved by suicide and working with people. This is what I do. But I said, that's your challenge for the next workshop. I'd like to see all of your mantras. How are you going to make a difference? What's come out of this workshop? And so, you know, that's a challenge that I set them. And I said, basically, you challenge me for anything and I'll try my best. I'm challenging you and you try your best. Again, it's just being open and transparent. This is what we are looking at. So it's Johnston's of Elgin's, Moray Mentalk, which I've got the chair next door to me, and the magnificent Moray Wellbeing Hub, who we have partnered with. And it's good for us to know there's so much brilliant support, not only for our people, but for their families in the community. And the work they do is absolutely breathtakingly good. So to have a relationship and building a relationship with them to that chain, an unbreakable chain of hope, keeps us going, drives us, keeps us energized and a way forward. So having that at the moment, and we want more peer support. I particularly loved all of your presentations. And again, you probably be getting an email from me saying, can we have a chat about this? Could you like to do a talk with us and everything? That would just be incredible. Again, you know, we want to build up that peer support. Coming to groups like this is just absolutely incredible. So if there's anything that you need from us, please get in touch. Even if it's just for a cup of coffee and a natter and a blether, that's absolutely fine. But I wouldn't be here today without the support and the enthusiasm and the energy and the passion of this gentleman here. So we're going to go on to the slides now, and Scott will take you through about 2 or 3 slides of what Moray Mentalk. What he does here at Johnston's is incredible. What he does out in the community is unbelievable. And so I shall, if that's okay, hand over to you, Scott, just quickly.
Hi everybody. Worked at Johnston's for about 11 years, and about 18 months ago I was affected by a friend who committed suicide. So a friend of mine and I got together to basically start up a support group for men in the local area. It's called Moray Mentalk. It's predominantly a support group for men in the local area where they can get together and connect with each other in a safe environment, and they can speak about things that they might not be overly confident about speaking to, whether it be at work or with their own families. So our main aim is basically to make sure that there's no guys out there feeling isolated, and they can get in touch with us, they can connect with us if need be. Our main aim is to try and break, we've talked about stigma and we spoke about that earlier on. The stigma for our group is that men don't talk and don't often open up and share how they're feeling about certain things. So that's what the group's about, is trying to break that particular stigma and try to bring guys together. We're predominantly a Facebook group as we initially started, and we've got avenues within that particular page that people can go on and talk, ask for advice, help each other, different things like that. So it's a private group, like I say, for men only, but we started off with a few members and it was just in a local pub that we wanted guys to kind of join. We're currently now sitting at over 990 members on our group chat. We have fortnightly drop-ins for guys to come. We're currently getting about 18 guys every fortnight coming, sharing some lived experiences, sharing advice, getting together, having a coffee, really informal, but just kind of helping and building relationships with guys across the community. So obviously in Murray we've got lots of little towns and villages all around. We've got people from all over the region joining, and we've in the last year or so we've increased our membership by about 42%. So it's growing all the time, which is really good in one hand, but has the concerns as well, because there's obviously a need for people to kind of come to and ask for help. It's not easily done. So you can see some of the slides there. Like I say, we've got 990 members as of today. We do fortnightly drop-in sessions, we do walk and talk sessions, we've done dips in the sea. We've recently become a constituted group, and we're currently doing a lot of fundraising to try and ensure the long-term goals are met for our group, and make sure that there's somewhere for guys to go to on a more regular basis. So it's really important that we can work together. It's connecting with other communities, other charities in the area as well, and just kind of raising awareness for mental health, for men in particular, about talking, opening up and trying to reduce the amount of suicides we've got in Murray, because it's kind of got the highest ratio of suicides, or one of the highest in Scotland, so we want to try and reduce that as best we can. So hopefully we can make a little bit of a difference along the way. If anyone's got any questions about it, feel free to ask, and you'll maybe see us on Facebook if you want.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Scott. So that's the end of our presentation. As I say, it's a journey we're on. There's not a day goes by that we don't have a good blether and everything, which is wonderful. We're on a journey. We know where we need to get to. We want to bash down any blockers in a very, very nice way, of course. And we just have a passion. And if you're passionate and you've got energy and you drive and enthusiasm, and you do what you do because morally it's just the right thing to do, and that's the message we want to get there. We do it because we want to be good human beings, we want to be kind, and we want to just do the things that we should be doing, and that's it. So any questions will be great. If you want to contact us, I'm sure Barney will send out those contact numbers, and certainly we'd like to get in touch with some of you guys to see if you can share some stuff with us, or we can share some stuff with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. That was a great presentation. And I think this is a really good example of how workplaces can form connections with their local services, and also empower people to set up their own services if this is something they're really passionate about, to break down that stigma, normalise conversations. So thank you so much for that. We were going to have another presentation from Patty, but she has kindly offered to write more notes so that can be shared out, so that we're not keeping you past 11:30. But I just wanted to see, is there any last minute questions people had for any of our speakers and presenters today, and also just share my gratitude. If there's not, I will do the evaluation poll, and then you're free to go. But please feel free to ask questions. For the next couple of minutes, I'll see if any pop into the chat or if there's any raised hands. And if there's not, I will share that poll.